Was anyone not present at the previous session? All right. That makes it slightly harder to understand what we're doing, maybe, but hopefully you can follow along. Because the idea is that you now can, that you take an example facade, which is called Vonk Facade Starter, and it's on GitHub, on this link here. You clone it, and you get a copy of Vonk. You integrate the two, so you can run your own facade. And then you can adjust that facade. It's a facade. It's a implementation towards a simple two-table relational database on SQL Server. So you need a couple of prerequisites to do this. Easiest for programming, I find Visual Studio, especially for debugging. It should be possible in Visual Studio Code as well, but I'm not very fluent with real development on Visual Studio Code. I will try to do it live here as well, so you can follow along, or you can go your own pace, faster or slower, as you see fit. So first, we need to go to simplifier.net, log in or sign up. And this is not very pretty. Yeah, so that's better. And oh, right on top there is Vonk. Tell me more or log in and install. I was already logged in, so that will only be install. It asks me kindly what organization I'm with. And you can choose your license, evaluation, community. That's new. There's a free version of Vonk. The only limitation is it runs on SQLite and not on the other databases. And it will also not run a facade. So for now you need an evaluation license. And since we changed the license structure in the recent version, this is only if you have the previous version. So I download a key, the Vonk license JSON, I save it. Right, in my downloads. Then start installing. You can do it on Docker, but that's quite hard to develop a facade against, because you need to get everything in a container. So I want to install the Vonk binaries. Download them. Here's instructions on how to install them, or how to get previous versions. This is the distribution. I save that as well. And since it's useful to know which version it was, if you go to the list previous versions here, by the way, it's always a versioned file number, and this is just always the latest. I happen to know it's 3.10, that is the latest version. And I save it. And there it is. Oh, it's still downloading. Oh, there it is. Unwrap this. And since this is a bit of a long name for the command line, I'll just call it Vonk DevDays. There's one thing I need to change now, and that's getting a license file there. Well, that was in downloads. No, not there. Let's put it right in there. Didn't show me where it went. Vonk license should be here now. Or I did something wrong. Yeah, there it is. The only thing we need to do now is make the configuration aware of this license. You can change the app settings default. The preferred way is to keep the defaults and overwrite them with your own settings. And we call that instance.json. That is not a name free to choose, it has to be this name. And we can strip out just about everything because we're not going to change a lot, except for the license file. So you need to include only the changes here. I'm just going to delete everything else right now. So there's even more things to the license. It can also count all the requests that come by. And there we go. Oh, there's no opening bracket. That's a rightful complaint. It says it's a trial license, but that was not the name of my file. So I change it. And now let's see whether this works. CD, wherever I deployed it, that was in Vonk DevDays. At least it does something. Now it's running on SQLite in the default configuration, no facade included yet. So if you can reproduce it, you're a long way there. You are able to evaluate Vonk. Note, by the way, that we're 7 minutes on the way in the session, and I'm running Vonk. It's that fast to evaluate it. So I can now ask for the metadata. That's the most complex request I can do because it has to see all the resource type it supports, the search parameters, etc. And then it tells you about that. So this supports everything. It's a very, very, very long capability statement. Very boring as well. Does it have any patience? This is not what I would expect. What is it running? Am I in the right directory? Maybe I changed some settings or looked at the wrong place. I expected no patient at all. Oh, yeah, I did a post. That's the reason. Now there is a patient. So post works as well. And if I just get all the patients.
I'm sorry, but I missed how you get Vonk running. I don't see.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's little trick. There's indeed no executable, but looking back at the command I started, there it is. You call the .NET executable on Vonk server DLL. The reason why we do this is the DLL is framework independent. So it can run on any platform. The platform dependent part is the .NET exe. So, but you need to have a .NET Core runtime before you can do this. If you have Windows, there probably is already a .NET Core runtime. Huh?
No, it didn't find a compatible framework version.
Oh, yeah, that might be a problem. You have to download it. That's what these links are for.
I'm not sure my company likes it.
And it says here, and then it's best to do the SDK because then you can program with it as well. But all the downloads are on .NET. All right, so now that is, right now we'll stop it because we're not interested in the full version. shutting down. It can take a little while because there are some maintenance tasks running that get gracefully shut down before the application shuts down. Now you have to clone that GitHub repository. I hope you know how to clone a repository because that would be beyond the topic of this. And you can open that in Visual Studio. And you get this. First of all, we're gonna just run it and see what happens. To make it run inside our Vonk, we adjust a few properties. Normally your output would go to the bin folder and then debug whatever. Now we're gonna output it into that Vonk, and it was in this case Vonk DD, and into the plugins directory, and you can choose your own subdirectory here if you're developing multiple plugins. So that will be my output path. And to run it, and normally you would run the project, but since we are making a library project, that makes no sense because a library project cannot be run. It is not an executable. So again, we run .NET and we run our Vonk. In this case, it was Vonk DD, capital D's. Doesn't really matter on Windows, but it does on other operating systems. So we set the working directory to our Vonk directory, and we say start Vonk here. So we put our facade in the plugins, and we say start Vonk. That's it. That alone will not make it recognize our facade because we need to change the app settings accordingly. We integrated app settings in the project that you can simply copy and paste. What it does, it sets the subscription off. Subscriptions can actually work on your facade as well, as long as you support the search parameters being used in the subscriptions. But that's a bit of an advanced topic. So what it adds is a connection string to your database. And it sets the pipeline options. So what is the components that are in that pipeline and which are not. And it says, we need context, so that and parses that HTTP context and translates it back and forth to the Vonk context. It needs some core components on repository that has the interfaces, for example. We'll do it on R3. And we want to implement search, and it even implements CRUD. And all the validation is driven by the administration, so we can use that. Capability configuration serves us the metadata. And then we're going to integrate our own implementation of the facade. We can even integrate the demo page, demo front page that we have. On the administration path, nothing really much happens, except we don't need R4 here either, because we're not going to support R4. Other things to change is we don't have all the resource types in our database. Unless you're a full-fledged EHR, and still then you would not support all the resource types. We just do patients and observation and only a couple of search parameters on them. This is a special one and an anomaly that we will eventually solve. We need to be able to search on structure definition URL to find canonicals. There's no need for you to program it, but it has to be in the app settings. So we copy all of this over to our app settings that we had adjusted already. Now we do need a comma here. And logically we have slightly too many curly brackets. All right, and we need a connection string to it. So there comes the database in place. There is a script in the repository as well. C git Vonk Facade starter scripts. It says create my database. You need to run this on SQL Server to actually create your database. I already did that, of course. I'm just going to show you what it looks like afterwards. Here's what it looks like. It actually creates the databases itself and the tables within them. And the create database statements and the use statements, maybe there's a little SQL Server flavor in there. This is not very flavored. It's pretty much standard. So if you want to try this on another database, you might need to do a few tweaks, but it shouldn't be too hard. And as you can see, it has a patient number. Patient has an email address, a first and a family name, and a date of birth. And then blood pressure is when it was measured, and high and low values. Not too simple, and it inserts a couple of records in the database as well, so you have something to start with, which is usually the case if you build a facade. There's already data in it. All right. Now I happen to have this connection string here. And luckily it's integrated security, so you don't get to see my password. Right. So we have the same server, but we changed the settings. And it might be a good idea to actually build the project, otherwise nothing will be in the plugins directory, of course. So I built project. Let's see what happens. VonkDD, there's the plugins directory. Hey, there's the VC directory. You see a couple of plugins come already with Vonk. Yep, there it is. That should work. Test number 1 is, can we now start the server or can't we? Well, at least it didn't throw any errors when I started it. That's a good start. Does it work? Does it have any patience? First request is always a little slow because all the objects need to create it from scratch. Oh, it actually has patience. It has 6 patients. That's mainly because I've been playing around, because the script includes 4 patients. But I've used this database before. So that works, and I can also ask for the metadata. As you can see by the scroll bar, it's much shorter now. Because here in the rest part, we see it supports observation with the search parameter subject, and it supports patient with the search parameter identifier. And besides that, of course, it supports _ID. So this is dynamically adjusted. I didn't do any configuration for this, except trimming down the supported search parameters. I don't have to edit the capability statement or whatever. That's dynamically adjusted. If you include plugins with custom operations, like it's being done here, because the $document operation is in here, I'm not sure whether it will completely work with your, it will not work with your facade because it needs other resource types. And apparently therefore it's not here either. But as you can see, a $validate is automatically included here as well. Oh, I know why document is not in there, because I left it out of the app settings. It's obvious. Now, the more interesting part is maybe when you're developing, to shut this down. Yes. Demo effect. Well, yeah, there, shut down. And but you obviously you want to debug this, don't you? It started. So now when I put a breakpoint here in, let's say, my VC search repository. Here, it should pass somewhere here if I start searching for patient. Get patients. Bam, there we are. So now you can debug your facade, which is probably what you would like to do, because other than this example, it will never work the first time, of course, just like any other software. This also allows us to see what it will be doing. As we can see, the resource type is, as expected, patient. And let's go in there. It says, oh, then go search patient. And it says, okay, create me a query using the patient query factory and my database context for the arguments that I got and the options that I got. By using this query context, you don't need to worry about all these arguments and options, etc. Okay, here's the patient query factory. I will now hide this a little, so you can see a little more code. And this patient query factory has these add value filter methods for token values, because underscore ID is, underscore ID, maybe you didn't realize underscore ID is not a string value, it's a token value. And identifier is a token as well. And it supports the reference from value because of the subject parameter. There's some sorting here in as well. I will not go there. That's why I have overridden the end. That's just for extra examples. Normally, if you just do search parameters, you wouldn't need to override the end. That's arranged for in the base class. So the main thing is here, I know when I query for ID, I check whether it's actually a patient ID, and if it is, then I return a predicate query, which is just something on patient that returns either true or false. It says the ID must match that patient ID. This is LINQ. Anyone not familiar here with LINQ? .NET development is like incomplete without LINQ. So for relational database, I definitely recommend it. And then there's here, if I have identifier, I have to match some patient number. You see, if the name is otherwise, I don't even act on it. I don't have to do anything special. It will just not be handled. I just return base add value filter. Otherwise, which essentially says, I'm not going to handle this. In this case, not much will happen because there are no arguments. So I will just continue and you'll get a response, although probably Postman says you're timed out by now. Not even. Well, there are all my patients. Of course, I can say identifier is that one, not sure it's in there. But now you would expect to end up the search in the patient query factory in this case, of course. Is that true? Yes, that's true. And we can see the code that was being valid is 85456, and that's being translated to where patient number is that number. If you're starting off with this, it's also useful to have a trace running on your SQL Server so you can see the queries that are being generated. You can also have the queries in the log from Entity Framework, but whatever, it's useful to see the actual queries coming out. Otherwise, you need to read link expression trees. I do not recommend that. They are very hard to read. So this works. I challenge you to first get this to work on your own machine. And then we have until 35, if I'm not mistaken. So there's 15 minutes left. But I'll first wait until you have this actually running, so I make sure you can continue on your own when the session ends. There's one thing maybe funny to go through. If we look at the Solution Explorer, we have the blood pressure query factory here as well. There. So I'm going to put a breakpoint on a reference value and on a reference to value, and I'm going to show you the difference, because the chains are the most complex types of searches. So I will go through that with you, and I also catch the patient query because it has subject as well. Right. First, let's do this. Observation. 10 minutes. All right, that should be enough to tell you all three. And then you can do the exercise for yourself to expand it with name, because that's a string search, that's a lot easier. I'm looking for observation this time, as you can see here. One note here, by the way. I said that in the relational facade, we make sure that you're not being searched for across resource types. If you run this as a server on your own with this project, the other project in the solution, there's one warning if you try to do that, because it will automatically start in IIS calling the root, and the root is a search across all the system, including multiple resource types, and you get an exception on that. So don't be alarmed if you see an exception. But in this case, we search for one resource type. It's observation, so we go into search observation, and nothing special to it, because we have no arguments. But we need to state there are observations, and it works. Now, I want to say I want an observation for a specific patient. So I have to look up the subject of the patient. It references patient 1. So I say subject, patient is patient 1. This is actually more information than we need, because of this link we already know it's patient. Now when I send it, all right, again, observation, that's right. We end up in this method. Add value filter for a reference value, not reference to, not reference from, but reference value, because there is no chain involved. We just said it's this reference. This reference is in the resource, no chaining needed. Now we know what a reference looks like, and this part is not in our database, so we need just the ID. And we check whether it's actually an integer, because we know our patient IDs are integers. So if it's not an integer, we can skip it. And if it's an integer, we say, okay, the blood pressure patient ID, because the entity framework parts are connected, must be patient ID. And this will turn into a join. It will says blood pressure join patient on patient ID. So even there's no chaining in the search arguments, you still need to chain in your database because the patient ID is not in the observation table. Right, that was one variant, directly asking for this. Now, it would be nice to know what patient 1 is. Continue. As I said, we did nothing special to implement the read operation, but it ends up in a search, so it works. And we see that the name of this patient is Adams, and the identifier, and that's the interesting part here because we have a search parameter on that, is this. So now I could say subject patient identifier is that number. Same again, observation. Now we end up in the reference to value, because this references to the patient and then to the identifier. Parameter name is indeed subject, and the value targets indeed contains patient. It is only patient. A search parameter might target multiple resource types. So now what I do is, and that's an extension method on this reference to value, and I say create another query on that reference. Yeah, 5 minutes. So create another query on patient identifier. And that's what it will do. I think we already had a breakpoint on identifier. Not anymore. So I'm going to run to the next statement, but as you can see, I will first end up here where an identify query is created on patient. When that is done, we get this back and I say my patient IDs is the result of executing this query. Now the execute, and that's what I explained shortly in the presentation, but slightly more elaborate here, it returns an iQueryable, and that's essential in entity framework. An iQueryable is something that is to be executed in the database. It's not executed, it's to be executed. If I were to return a list of integers, then it would be executed, and I don't want that. So now I take those IDs and I said, okay, I want my blood pressure patient ID to be in that set. That will be translated to an exists query. And voila, here's the observations for that patient. So you don't have to do all the parsing of this whole search parameter, you just make sure you understand where this goes to in your database and create a subquery for it. You also don't need to know where it then goes, because I could say maybe patient, and then link, and then another patient, and then his name. And as long as you know all the individual pieces, it will then be glued together. All right, final one, because I'm almost out of time, and now, so what's the idea of this observation? It's 1, okay. If I say patient has observation patient ID is 1. I hope I got the syntax right. Well, apparently I didn't. Or I did something else wrong. Parameter patient is not supported on the resource type observation. So what's wrong? We didn't implement patient. We implemented subject. Better. You noticed, by the way, we didn't get here previously. That's because we limited the supported parameters. And patient is not in there, so it wouldn't even ask you. It just says, nope, it's not supported. All right, so if this is subject and the source is observation, oh yes, it is observation, then create a query on those observations. Yeah, 1 minute. And then come back here and join the things together. So I go through there, and that's on ID. I don't have a breakpoint on that. And then we say join the whole stuff together, get the IDs, and do that. And this will create and exist the other way around. Well, there they are. I get the patient here first, and then I get the observations. Oh, I get an operation outcome. What's wrong? Oh, it says sorting on last update is not supported. That's true. We didn't implement that, and by default, if there is no sort given, Vonk adds last updated as a sort parameter. It's no hassle if you didn't do that. And patient identifier is that, and include subject. I think this is the way to write this. It wasn't. I did it the wrong way around. What I wanted to say is you have to do observation includes patient, of course, but there's no time to write that out again. The idea is that the include works because you supported the subject search parameter. I hope you have a lot of fun implementing your own facade. And if you have any questions, vonk@fhir.ly. Okay, thank you very much.